The Chiefs are champions of the AFC West once again. I'm no longer in sunny Florida, and we've all got some things to complain about. Let's talk some Chiefs. Welcome to RGR Football. Welcome to Monday Mornings with the Chief in the North. I am Seth Kaiser, the Chief in the North. And as you can see, I am back in my normal locale. I am no longer recording sporadically from sunny Florida. All good things must come to an end eventually. And my family vacation, it came to an end. I appreciate everyone's patience, as I obviously wasn't providing the type of content or the amount of content that I normally do. I had a wonderful time spending time with my family. And now, I guess I'll spend time with them up here too, but it's just negative 10 degrees when I do. But as we do every Monday here or Tuesday, depending on when the Chiefs play, we're here to talk about some of the main storylines for the Chiefs as they have following the game that they just played. And this week, we've got a few interesting things to talk about in terms of where the Chiefs stand overall, big picture stuff versus smaller picture stuff that might lead to other big picture stuff, because there's lots of reasons to be happy and there's lots of reasons to complain, frankly, right now. The Chiefs overcame the Texans, who are by and large considered the worst team in the league by probably a country mile. They needed overtime to do it. It was a frustrating game to watch. However, at the end of the day, the Chiefs walked away the winners. They had a walk-off touchdown overtime by Jerick McKinnon. That was one of the few fun moments of the game. And they win 30-24. They stay even with the Buffalo Bills for first place in the AFC. Obviously, the Bills have the tiebreaker there. And so even falling a single game back probably would have spelled the end of their hopes for a 1 seed. They keep the pressure on Buffalo to continue to win out in order to try to get that 1 seed. And my understanding, based on Matt Derrick, who I've never seen wrong about things like this, is that with that win, by securing 11 wins, the Chiefs have gotten themselves to a position, because of some other, wins, losses that occurred around the league, to where I think 3 seed is about the lowest that they're going to go at this point, which is a really, really great place to be with this much time left in the season. It's an impressive season that they've had in a retooling type year. And of course, they locked up the AFC West 7 years in a row. I tried to do a little bit of digging. It's not the easiest information in the world to find, but my understanding is that's happened 2 or 3 other times in league history that a single team has dominated a division that much. 7 straight years. Keep in mind, before the Andy Reid era, the Chiefs had never won the AFC West in back-to-back seasons. Never back-to-back. And now they've done it 7 consecutive years, the better part of a decade, 70% of a decade. The Chiefs are AFC West champs. That is reason to celebrate. It was interesting because when I tweeted that out, I had a lot of Chiefs fans in my mentions that are pretty upset about various flaws, real and otherwise, with the team. Some of them, again, very real. But really, where we sit right now as Chiefs fans is the envy of the league. They've been the most successful team in the league 4 years, over the last 4 years, last 5 years. They are consistently a Super Bowl contender. They are consistently right there at the top of the league. It's fun to watch. It's fun to see. Of course, that doesn't put them above criticism. I do think it's worth noting, I talked a little bit last week, I wrote more about it, to not really take for granted what we're seeing week in and week out with Patrick Mahomes, who had a phenomenal game against Houston, which it's hilarious that they didn't put up more points, but that's a whole other story. It's a similar thing with the Chiefs themselves. 7 division titles in a row. It's happened just a few other times in NFL history. Don't take for granted the level of dominance that you're seeing from the Chiefs. I understand, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. Someone had mentioned, I think in the comment section or maybe on Twitter, that it's a blessing and a curse to be a Super Bowl contender year in and year out, because you become a little more nitpicky and you notice those little flaws a lot more. And that's very, very true, because you're thinking every year Super Bowl or bust. And again, that's an awesome place to be, but it can be a frustrating place to be as well. But be all that as it may, 7-time AFC West champs. And there are a few things, though, that I think are just worth noting as we start to move into the final phase of the season. really start ramping up for the playoffs. As you can see, I am not used to the sun being as absent as it is here in the Great White North. It was an ugly game for the defense against a terrible offense. I mean, the Texans have a god-awful offense, and they were missing Dameon Pierce. They were missing Brandon Cooks. I mean, this was not a good team. The fact that Chiefs even gave up 24 points to them is somewhat embarrassing, to be perfectly honest. It is worth noting that the Texans did have under 250 total yards of offense. And so when they did score, it was usually on short fields. And that, I think, was part of the frustration for fans, is that the Chiefs turned the ball over a couple times, which we'll get to that in a minute. But the defense couldn't really hold after those turnovers, or at least hold them to a field goal, which is what you'd like to see after a turnover. You'd like to see your defense be able to hold the opponent to at least a field goal. Chiefs couldn't really do it. That's a frustrating thing to see, that the defense can't quite hold up in those situations. It's the second week in a row they've given up a season high in points to a really bad offense. First, it was Denver last week, which, Russ Wilson played pretty well. Fine, whatever. And then this week, like I said, holy cow, the lack of sun is getting to me. And then this week, though, doing it with the Texans, that's discouraging. Here's what I would say. Yes, it was light on yardage, but it was still a pretty poor performance. There were still some tackling issues. They had some issues in coverage against players that they really shouldn't. And on a day where Chris Jones was playing at less than 100%, he was ill. He had missed Friday's practice, and he clearly wasn't quite himself. He had a few splash plays, but he wasn't himself out there. And you could see the effect that had on the pass rush overall. And that's what happens when your pass rush is way too often a one-man show. Those are all problems. Those are all things that the Chiefs are going to need to figure out. Here's the thing. This was always going to be a retooling year for the defense. They're starting, I think it's, they've got 4 rookies playing significant playing time. 3 of them are flat out starting. And really, the amount of time that you're seeing played by Watson, Williams, and McDuffie, you end up with guys, you got the equivalent of like 6 starters out there, because you've got Karlaftis obviously playing a ton of snaps. You obviously, with McDuffie along with the other guys, you have Brian Cook playing a ton of snaps. It is a lot of young guys out there, and it was always going to be a retooling year for the defense. And normally what happens with Spagnuolo's defense is it gets better as the year goes along. With all these young guys, we're not quite seeing that same uptick. And we're also seeing some of the same flaws that we've seen previously get picked on, teams throwing to the middle of the field, some of Nick Bolton's coverage issues. We're seeing some of those things still get picked on. To be fair, Willie Gay Jr. gave up a touchdown as well, so it's not like Bolton was alone getting exploited. Harris had a really bad pass interference penalty, although he shouldn't have been on the field in general, but that's a whole nother ball of wax. So the short story is interesting. It was an ugly game for the defense. It is worth noting, at least, and I'm trying to be careful how I say this, because it's not really an excuse, because the defense did enough ugly things on its own. But it is worth noting at least 2 Texans drives, 3 different Texans drives were only sustained because of interesting penalty calls by Carl Sheffers and crew. And then one was basically an entire drive. I believe there were 8 plays and 7 penalties. It was just penalty, touchdown. And there was a penalty on the touchdown, but the tight end caught it. So does that matter? Maybe a little. It's at least worth noting. But if nothing else, it's demonstrative that the defense is not a defense that can overcome those types of flaws, that can overcome those types of obstacles when they get those penalties called on them. One thing that's worth noting, though, with the defense, to its credit, when the Chiefs offense was struggling early in the game, they punted the first couple times. The defense forced a couple punts in a row before finally giving up a touchdown eventually after, I think it was a turnover. They did also force that turnover in overtime. Great play by Frank Clark, and a great play by Willie Gay Jr. to come up with the ball that was basically recovered by a Texan, and he essentially stole it from him. So, yes, this is a flawed team with a flawed defense. The offense is probably the best in the NFL, other than maybe the Eagles, but I think probably consistently is going to be able to game by game outperform them just a little bit. But they are a flawed team. And that's actually one of the things that you're going to be seeing. It might already be up by the time you're watching this. That I wrote about the Chief North newsletter is a bunch of different flaws and what level of concern I have for them. Some of the main flaws of the team, because there's some that I think are not really that big a deal. That just they're easy to see on game day, but they're not critical. And so I think some of them, though, like the turnovers, some of the self-inflicted errors, and the pass rush and pass protection issues, those are the things the team's going to have to deal with. Those are going to be some of the main storylines I think people are going to be looking at this week to see if they can tighten that up down the stretch, because those are going to be the primary issues in the playoffs. If they can protect Mahomes and they can get after the opposing passer, even at an average rate on either of those, they should be the Super Bowl favorite. If they can't, then they're looking at potentially an early exit from the playoffs. The reality is, anytime you have Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and the weapons that the Chiefs have on offense, along with kind of their newly discovered run game, you're going to be a favorite. Overall, I mean, the Chiefs are 11-3. They are one of 2 or 3 teams that should be considered the most serious Super Bowl contenders. It's a good place to be, but there's work to be done. And it seemed like with the tenor of the locker room, even though they were celebrating winning the division, there's a really funny picture of Andy Reid holding up, it was the football or maybe it was the hat, celebrating, and Mahomes in the background. He just does not look impressed at all. I think that was probably more of a timing issue, but it's at least worth noting with some of the quotes from Mahomes after the game. They know they've got stuff to work on. So those are some of the things that stood out to me from the game. It's nice to be back. It's nice to be here with all you fine people. I appreciate you watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all the things that you're supposed to do with a video like this. We'll be back for Thursday's mailbag this week, getting back to our normal schedule of things. And you know what? 7 years running, it is a good week to be a Chiefs fan.